Hi, everyone. Great to see so many of you here. Sorry for the slight delay. My apologies. In terms of Good Debate today, I think we all agree it's a really topical issue before us. Actually, when we were coming up with this, we come up with all our debates in about March. We were a little bit worried about whether something so contemporary at that time would continue to have such resonance. I think the events of the last month, at least, with the cabinet hearings, have really shown that it is a really relevant issue. So thank you, first of all, to Julia, who has convened this debate tonight. Just one addition to the order paper before I explain the rules. Minna Salami will be actually speaking on proposition, and we're flipping over Karina to speak on the opposition. In terms of how this works, I know it's week 3 now, but I'll just run through the rules. They're all on the back of the order paper as well. We're going to start with 10-minute speech from Minna. Then we're going to go on to a 10-minute speech from the opposition with Miranda. We'll have a chance to make floor speeches of a minute in length, so get ready for that. If you make a floor speech, you get to come into drinks afterwards, so that's always an incentive. And then we'll move on to 2 more speakers, one from proposition, one from opposition, a round of floor speeches, prop, op again, and then you're all 3 to go. So, without further ado, let's get everything going. We're going to start off the debate with Minna Salami. Minna is a Finnish-Nigerian journalist who has propagated information on African feminist issues and Nigerian women through her award-winning blog, Miss Afropolitan. She is also, I think, on Elle's 12 Women to Watch list. Is that right? Good. Yeah, well, good. My memory served me correctly. Minna, the floor is yours.
Oh, this is probably a bad idea. Yeah, I'm going to leave that for later. So it's just a little over a year since Me Too became popularized, and as we know, there's been a good amount of analysis about the movement in the past year. And as we approach the 1-year anniversary, there's been even more vital discussions about whether or not Me Too has failed or succeeded. Those who argue that Me Too has failed typically say, on the one hand, that it is because it has turned women into victims, or that it has created a culture of fear where men, the poor things, are afraid to even talk to women, or that it has killed romance, or that it has created a tokenistic environment. On the other hand, are those who say that Me Too has failed because it has not been diverse enough, or that it is focused on women in Hollywood and neglected other women, especially those of disenfranchised backgrounds. Furthermore, there has been an emphasis on divides between old feminists and young feminists, on white feminists and women of color feminists, trans women and cis women, and so on. In truth, none of these positions can be neatly packaged together. Yes, Me Too has sometimes celebrated a particular type of victim narrative, which may not be useful for women in the long run, but it has definitely not gone too far in making men afraid. In fact, it has not gone far enough, considering the stories of sexual abuse that we continue to hear about every day. It's also true that Me Too has not made space and given voice to all women. This is something that I myself have spoken about in a number of talks and articles, but it is not true that it has only affected Hollywood or women in the Western world. There's Me Too activism in Japan, Kenya, Nigeria, Iran, and India, as you might have seen, is having a watershed Me Too moment right now. Where Me Too has failed is not so much to do with neglecting specific feminist issues per se. It is to do with failing to connect with feminism more broadly itself. You may be surprised that I would make such an argument. You may be thinking that Me Too is definitely connected to feminism. After all, you read about feminism and Me Too in the tabloids and newspapers every day. But that is part of the problem. A successful media apparatus has convinced us all that Me Too is synonymous with feminism, with all of feminism. And this is the first significant error. Putting the Me Too movement in the hands of the media, and therefore in the hands of the male establishment who owns the media. This is especially dangerous at a time when news and debate have become entertainment and drama with the ultimate aim of evoking strong emotions in order to sell advertising through clicks. In such anti-intellectual times, Me Too is quickly turning into a media commodity rather than a critical movement backed by feminist ideas, theory, and history. Because make no mistake, while Me Too has become mainstream, feminist ideas, theories, and history have not. At this point, I should clarify what I mean by feminism, because there's an increasing diversity in the definition of the term. By feminism, I'm referring not only to the grassroots activism, the resistance, the celebrity endorsements, the hot takes, the think pieces, and so on, but most especially to the centuries-long women's intellectual tradition that has produced an ever-evolving compendium of knowledge about how women can survive in a patriarchal world and simultaneously oppose it. By knowledge, by the way, I do not only mean books and theory, but also pamphlets, arts, documentary, political speech, community work, museums, etc. In other words, feminism is a body of work for women, by women, about how to liberate women from the structural, cultural, and institutional forms of male dominance. It is from this feminist compendium of knowledge that women have found solutions to oppression from the 19th century until today. It is with feminist tools that women have strategized for suffrage, reproductive rights, girls' rights to education, women's rights to equal pay and sexual freedom, and their rights to be protected from religious and imperialist warfare. It is within this compendium that feminists have created theory and strategy about consciousness raising, empowerment, and intersectionality, to name only a few feminist ideas that have changed the world. And it is from this compendium that Me Too has failed to seek the knowledge of how to end impunity of male violation of women's bodies. Already in 1940, Rosa Parks, more known for sparking the Alabama bus boycott, was a sexual assault researcher in the American South. In 1970, Susan Brown Miller argued that because rape is defined by men and not by women, men use it as a means of perpetuating male dominance by keeping all women in a state of constant fear. Feminists like Bell Hooks and Michelle Wallace have analyzed masculinity, power, and sexual dominance. Catherine McKinnon, already in 1979, argued that sexual harassment needs to be illegal. This was 7 years before the UK Court of Session would acknowledge that sexual harassment can be a form of discrimination. In Anita Hill, whose 1981 allegations against the then Supreme Court nominee, Clarence Thomas, has been writing and lecturing about sexual harassment for decades. In fact, already in 1837, Sarah Grimke, one of the founding mothers of feminism, wrote that black women were, quote, employed by the planter or his friends to administer their sexual desires, end quote. In other words, feminists have hundreds of years of analysis about how to tackle sexual harassment and violence. The fleeting and fast-paced nature of the media does not easily allow for these critical connections to be made. But without this kind of historical context, Me Too is operating in a vacuum and spending a lot of energy reinventing square wheels. I've noticed, for example, that in most of the articles and tweets and posts discussing the Me Too era, there's hardly any mention of feminism, no explicit connection made to the ideology from which it erupted. There is merely the assumption of feminism. At celebrity awards and ceremonies and publicity events, there's a lot of talk about the Me Too and Time's Up hashtags, but hardly anyone mentions the term feminism, and certainly not the type of feminism that seeks to challenge structural dominance. So in asking you to support the motion that Me Too has failed, I'm therefore asking you to support what feminists have always known and fought against, namely that men's sexual assault of women must be fought against ideologically, collectively, and structurally. Feminism is to Me Too what democracy is to the vote. If there's no democracy, then there's no point fighting for the right to vote. Similarly, if Me Too is not informed and motivated by feminism, then it has no compass, no map to guide it in the direction that will bring it home. So let me close by saying that Me Too has brought women's rage to the fore, and that is incredibly powerful. My point is not to dismiss the huge impact that Me Too has had on society. But without the political insight and the historical perspective to analyze it, it ends up only giving visibility to women's rage, while failing to fully expose and challenge the structural and entrenched systems that cause this intense anger in the first place. It encourages women to break the silence on sexual oppression, but it doesn't embolden them to listen to what feminists have been saying for so long. This is not simply a failure, it is a calamity. The problem feminism has always had is that it was not heard properly. And nothing would be a greater failure than if the women's movement of our times, Me Too, committed the same error. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miranda, for those wonderful words. We're going to move now on to the opposition and turn to Dr. Miranda Horvath. Dr. Miranda is an academic at Middlesex University, London. She was previously a fellow in the Child and Women Abuse Studies Department at London Metropolitan University. Her research focuses on violence against women from feminist and forensic psychological perspectives. Miranda, the floor is yours.
Much. Thank you for the invitation to join the debate tonight. The topic of tonight's debate is timely and extremely important. I'm opposing tonight's motion, and my argument comes down to this. What the vast majority of victim survivors of sexual violence and harassment tell us that they want, consistently and above everything else, is to be believed. Centering that fact, I would argue that Me Too has been successful in allowing many victim survivors to speak out about their experiences and feel that they will be heard, believed, and supported in a way that they never have before. Alyssa Milano, who was instrumental in bringing Me Too to prominence, set out with the intention of giving people a sense of the magnitude of the problem. And I think we can all agree that that has happened. But in order to debate the motion, we need to consider what its other aims were. We need to consider what Tarana Burke, who originally used the phrase, has outlined, and what others have suggested we should be aiming for. These aims are diverse and range from big, broad changes, like altering laws and policies, to more specific things, like ensuring something as simple as all rape kits should be processed. We do not have time to analyse each of these aims and successes and failures in detail. So I'm going to focus on the broad intention to improve laws and policies about sexual violence and harassment in the arenas that I'm most familiar with. So before I go any further, I'll tell you something about myself. I'm a researcher working from an applied social psychological perspective on sexual violence and abuse and the cultural context in which it occurs. Over the last 17 years, amongst other things, I've investigated the role of alcohol and drugs in rape, multiple perpetrator rape, sexual harassment and assault on public transport, the impacts of pornography on children and young people's attitudes, beliefs and behaviours, and the links between lads' mags, rape myth acceptance and rape proclivity. All the really jolly topics. I've provided advice based on empirical evidence to a range of professionals working to prevent and reduce sexual violence and harassment. So I will therefore make my arguments tonight based on what my own research and the decades of research that Minna mentioned, by others has told us. And I need to say something about language. You may have already noticed that I keep saying victim-survivor. Victim survivors of sexual violence and harassment have different preferences for how they'd like to be referred to and identify themselves, often actually just by their own name. But victim and survivor are the two most common. So I will use those labels together to be respectful, but also to acknowledge that for some, neither of these will feel appropriate. A problem we have debating this motion now is that it's really too soon to say with any confidence whether the changes Me Too has instigated are deep and insignificant enough to impact societal structures for the better. My training is as a psychologist, and I'm a researcher, so my instinct is to say we need to gather evidence to tell us what the effects are or aren't. But that kind of argument isn't really any fun for tonight. So I will actually start by having a look at the Me Too movement so far, try and tie it to relevant data, and contextualize my answer within my own research and other work, and then highlight the centrality of believing victim survivors, both to the movement and to the effectiveness of an improvement of the criminal justice system. I will reference recent studies, as well as a landmark cultural moment with an exposé of police in the 1980s to examine how change happens. And finally, I'll return to the ongoing nature of movements like this and work like this. When evaluating the successes and failures of Me Too, it's really crucial to remember Tarana Burke has said that Me Too is about creating empowerment through empathy. Now, as a sexual violence researcher, that makes perfect sense to me. Research from across the globe with rape victim survivors has clearly and consistently shown that being believed when you tell someone that you've been raped is extremely important. The responses of the people a victim survivor tells are a critical component to the recovery process. And part of that recovery process for many victim survivors is about finding ways to feel empowered again. At their core, sexual violence and harassment are about one person or a group of people asserting their power over another person or a group of people. And research has found that if victim survivors choose to report the assault to the police, then whether that first police officer they tell believes them or at least gives the impression that they believe them, is a critical component into whether they're likely to remain engaged with the criminal justice system. So through highlighting the magnitude of the problem of sexual violence and harassment, Me Too has led to more victim survivors being believed or at least feeling like they're being believed, and we can therefore argue is a success. There are some studies emerging, for example, the Fawcett Society's recently published work, Me Too, 1 Year On, What's Changed, that are citing findings that argue for the successes of Me Too. So they are suggesting that the majority of young men that they included in their research are more likely to challenge sexual harassment since Me Too. They also said that half of their respondents said that actually what's acceptable has changed since Me Too. However, they also reported that older men and the law are lagging behind. Again, I'm not really surprised. This leads me to draw your attention to a larger point about the extent and scale of change and the proponents of Me Too are hoping for and how much time this may take. In order to do this, we're going to consider the very specific example of the investigation and prosecution of rape in England and Wales since the early 80s, so over 35 years ago. The approach taken by the police in the early 80s can be best summed up by the actions of some officers who were captured in episode 3, A Complaint of Rape, of a Roger Graf TV documentary series called Police. In episode 3, a woman with a history of psychiatric treatment claims she's been raped by 3 strangers, and in turn, she's bullied and cajoled by 3 male officers who just dismiss her story out of hand. One officer shouts in her face, "This is the biggest bollocks I've ever heard." The woman remains unseen as the camera assumes her point of view throughout the interview, trapped in the claustrophobic confines of the interrogation room, as she's subjected to the most hostile questioning. The accusing officers fill the frame in numerous close-up shots, and actually the viewer gains some sense of that double violation. The episode was aired soon after an infamous court decision in which a judge had accused a hitchhiker of contributory negligence in her own rape. So the combination of that judgment, that judge's comment, and that episode caused public outcry. And along with the reaction from campaigning groups like Women's Aid Federation and the Women's National Commission, now no longer in existence, who produced reports and lobbied for changes to happen, changes happened in the way police forces investigated rape. But change to law and policy is slow. Remember, marital rape was only added to existing UK law in 1991 and male rape in 1994. And whilst during the 80s and since, there have been many, many positive changes in the way British police forces investigate rape, their ability to investigate rape well in comparison to many other serious crimes consistently attracts concern and criticism. A variety of problems in the investigation and prosecution of sexual offences remain, something that Me Too has again highlighted. Victim dissatisfaction with their treatment in investigative procedures, the levels of attrition of rape cases, indicate possible systemic flaws in the handling of sexual offences by our criminal justice system. Furthermore, the conviction rate for rape is still the lowest at around 50% in comparison to all other crimes where it's around 86%. All of this leads me to the following points. Firstly, we really needed Me Too to happen. We unfortunately need regular outcry to keep us focused on the issues that need our attention. Secondly, the magnitude of change that is needed is going to continue to take time, and I wish that weren't the case. Progress in rape investigation and policy and practice often seems to occur through this crazy combination of attention being raised about an issue by feminist campaigning groups or activists or media controversy, changes being made or at least piloted on an operational level by police and non-governmental organisations, and then, only then, when there is some evidence to prove that they might work, are they adopted by the government or whoever is in charge. This is definitely not an efficient approach or best practice for an offence which affects 4 in 10 women and over a quarter of men in their lifetime. Given the magnitude of the problem of sexual violence and harassment, change should not be reliant on this slow cycle of events. I am, however, hopeful that with every Me Too, we learn more lessons and faster, more radical change is more possible. And finally, 1 year on, the work of Me Too has really just begun. And I'm optimistic that momentum will continue and significant changes can be made to how we deal with sexual violence and harassment. We need to understand Me Too as a movement, not a moment. And as Tarana Burke said a few days ago, and Minna has highlighted, this is a long fight. As she's been doing for years, and many activist groups have been doing, we need focused action as part of the movement, and not only by high-profile people with a platform, but by everyday women and allies. Perhaps the highest profile example within Me Too lately was Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, and it's an important part of the picture to compare her experience of testifying with that of Anissa Hill, who is African American. We can consider again the woman captured in a complaint of rape, who was also dealing with the impact of attitudes towards mental health. Me Too, especially once it recognised Tarana Burke's work, has highlighted the need for us all to continue to listen, recognising intersecting inequalities, deepen our understanding of experiences that differ from our own, and develop our allyship. Our work of bending history towards justice is ongoing.
Thank you so much for those words, Miranda. Before we move on to a round of floor speeches, so begin to think about what you're going to say whilst I say this to you. I'm going to give a brief reminder that we do have a live streaming service. Not many people seem to know that we have a live streaming service which you can have access to. So I'm waving to everyone out there who's following us via the live stream, but letting you know you can see any of our events from home just by logging into our computer system. And you can also engage with the debate, so you can tweet us. This was a struggle this week to get a good hashtag without messing up the system, but we've gone for hashtag #CUSMeToo without the hashtag because that was causing some issues. So do tweet us on that, and I will read them out. You can also send through a Facebook message. Good. Hopefully you've now had some time to collect your thoughts. So we're going to take a round of floor speeches. Does anyone want to make a brief speech in proposition of the motion? Anyone? Perfect. We'll go down here. And can you say your name and college first, please?
Patrick Gubiliak, down in college. So what I would like to say is that I agree with Mina on that the movement is not backed by ideas of feminism and equality, and that it did become hijacked by the media. This has become used for direct confrontation in Hollywood, which is what makes the media headlines, but also, for example, in Australia, in the case of Geoffrey Rush, who is now suing his employers, the Sydney Actors Guild, because they dismissed him after accusations appeared in newspapers. To reply specifically to Dr. Horvath about the law and old men, for example, in March this year, Yale student Saifullah Khan was acquitted at his trial and became legally innocent, yet the student body and the Yale student newspaper, with the support of the New York Times, still argue for his expulsion of someone who has been found legally innocent. This climate of paranoia and immediate trial by media has also recently been seen this week, actually, by the firing of University of Michigan professor John Rubadow, without any sexual harassment allegations even being forwarded. He was just dismissed. And I think this summer, in August, we were privy to an example of the hypocrisy of the movement from the top, not for all women, but in the case of Asia Argento, who was accused by her co-star Bennett in 2004 while working on a movie of sexual assault, who she quietly paid off for $380,000. So what I would urge you to vote, what I would like to say is that in that case, the other supporters of the Me Too movement urged for waiting until all the facts come out, let's not rush our judgment, and in stark opposition to what happened after, for example, straight after Harvey Weinstein, after all the other accusations. And with that, I would urge you to vote in proposition that Me Too as a movement has failed.
Thank you very much. Sorry for interrupting. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt. Does anyone want to make a point in opposition of the motion? Does anyone? I'm looking up for hands. I will go down here as well. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, it should start working, hopefully.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for your speech, Mina, and thank you for your speech as well. Wanted to just say that I disagreed with some of your points, because I think in terms of the debate, you know, whether Me Too has failed, you've got to first say, what are we looking at in terms of what the aims were, which you seem to have taken the view of just whether it's aligning itself with feminism or not. And I think you've, in your debate, forgotten about the actual victims and how a lot of people have, through this movement, managed to get the empowerment they needed to come forward and speak up about what's happened to them. And I would say that that is, I think, what crucially Me Too is actually about. It's about people that are affected by sexual violence and sexual abuse, even child sexual abuse. It's something that affects, you know, as the other lady said, 4 out of 10 people, and actually I would say probably more than that, because so many people are unable to come forward with what's happened to them, and the small amount that we see are the people who have felt empowered enough. And I think that with Me Too, you know, having just the culture of it's sort of like a kind of brainwashing almost for yourself as a victim to start feeling that actually what happened to you was not your fault, and it's constantly in the media, constantly in the public eye, and telling you that what happened was not your fault and what happened to you was not anything to do with you, and none of the blame lies with you. And then you start to feel that actually the cultures are changing and I can, you know, come forward with what's happened to me. And I think that's sort of crucially what Me Too is about, is changing the culture of how people view violence like this and how people view not victims but survivors of these crimes. And I think the empowerment is the part that actually really counts about Me Too, and I think in that sense it's completely succeeded, and hopefully it will for generations to come. So for that reason, I would urge people to vote in opposition of the movement.
Thank you. Does anyone have a point in abstention of the motion? Do you disagree with the motion title? Do you think we've done an awful job setting it? Anyone? Oh, down here. Amy? I'm looking up at the gallery next time, so.
So Amy Gregg, Somerville, Murray Edwards College. I think to assess whether or not a movement has particularly failed, it presupposes that the movement had a particular mission, a particular objective in terms of setting out. I think that's something Me Too specifically did not have. It was almost a kind of an organic explosion on Twitter and other social media sites where a large number of women collectively, effectively felt able to put forward their opinions, to put forward their experiences. I think Me Too is very much more about looking at whether or not women felt empowered to do that. It is not a mission with a particular outcome that was aimed. Whether or not, it had a good outcome or a bad outcome, that is certainly something we could debate. But in terms of whether or not it has succeeded or failed, I think that's kind of a false dichotomy in the sense that Me Too did not have a particular outcome that it was aiming for. It was just a movement that kind of rose up, has empowered women's voices, and in my opinion has created a great positive impact. But I think in assessing whether or not it failed or succeeded presupposes there was some kind of particular metric that the movement itself was attempting to measure itself by.
Thank you, Amy. I know there are lots more hands for several of the positions there, so I will come back to you after the second round of speech, and we'll try and get as many of those viewpoints as possible on the table. We move on now to our second speaker on side proposition, who's Kate Andrews. Kate is an associate director at the Institute of Economic Affairs. She oversees that organization's media center, which includes communication, public affairs, and digital output. She also regularly features across the national media and spoke here around this time last year, I think, on the Trump presidency. So, Kate, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's duly noted that we are having this debate 100 years after some women got the right to vote. Are women equal in 2018? The answer for me is a resounding no. You just have to look at domestic violence statistics or rape statistics to see that. We might disagree on the particular way that those statistics are calculated. We might think it's a higher or lower number. But I think all of us in this room could agree that women are the ones losing out. Women are the majority of the victims. No, we are not equal in 2018. And I come from a perspective that was aligned with the hashtag #MeToo movement in its original and organic form. Women were sharing their stories, coming up from out of the ground, being loud and vocal about the sexual harassment and rape and fear that they had experienced in their lives. And we were talking about how it must come to an end. But then how quickly the tide turned. It got wrapped up in a feminist movement that I feel has badly lost its way. And I feel very strongly that we need to look at the deeds or the evidence of this movement, not simply what it said, to make judgments. And if we look at the actions of the hashtag #MeToo movement, I feel that the majority can be summed up as a hijacked project taken over by celebrity names and politicians with ambitions who have failed to bring about meaningful change to the women who need it. And it's failed on multiple fronts. First, it's focused on the wrong issues. The Harvey Weinstein revelations and the Kevin Spacey revelations are actually quite few and far between the stories of hashtag #MeToo. Most are far more trivial in nature. More attention was given last year and this year to the possibility that a then cabinet minister may or may not have grazed a young lady's knee with his hand. It was admitted by the alleged victim in her article that, to quote, "it was so brief, it was almost deniable." More attention has been given to that than to the helpless female migrants detained in Yarlswood Detention Center who experienced sexual assault, violence, and rape on a far too frequent basis and are denied basic human rights that hashtag #MeToo supposedly stands up for. Hashtag #MeToo turned into hashtag #PayMeToo, a campaign that deliberately conflates the concept of equal pay with the gender pay gap, encouraging the most inflated statistics to be put forward to make women feel like they are fundamentally inferior and cannot get ahead in the workplace. The movement has made enemies where it should have made friends. I'm thinking back to Matt Damon, the famous actor, who came out and, despite expressing the fact that he wholly supported Me Too, happened to mention that there might be a difference between, and I quote, patting someone on the bum and rape or child molestation. Now, Matt Damon was then attacked on social media, condemned in traditional media. His former co-star Minnie Driver branded him systematically part of the problem for his comments, saying, "Let the women do the speaking up right now." Now, I'm sure for some people I'm the wrong kind of woman, but I happen to agree with Matt Damon that both of those things are fundamentally appalling, but there is a difference between them. And suggesting that there is not a difference between those things turns moral reasoning on its head, making us incapable of judging the good from the bad to the very bad. But that is the kind of thinking and rationale that this movement has encouraged. The movement has conjured up backward scenarios where women are treated as precious, delicate flowers, a stereotype that I thought we were fighting against for decades. The Friends actor David Schwimmer was applauded, praised for offering a woman a chaperone when she came to interview him in his hotel room, as if we were going back to the days where in order for a man and a woman to be alone, she needs somebody there to protect her. Claire Foy, the star of The Crown, had to come out and issue a statement that she was not offended or sexually harassed, that Adam Sandler had touched her knee on the Graham Norton show. She had never suggested that she was offended, but people were so offended on her behalf, #MeToo, that she had to come out and say, actually, I was fine. Myself and my knee were okay. Netflix this year brought in a new rule that men are not allowed to look at their female colleagues for more than 5 seconds. Staring is not allowed. Hugs were taken out, and you're certainly not allowed to flirt in the workplace. Now, this obviously brings in questions as to how the cameramen at Netflix are supposed to do their job, not being able to look at women for more than 5 seconds. But on a slightly more serious note, the kind of authoritarian, draconian attempt to regulate behavior between men and women, that men are so predatory, a stare could be deemed harassment, and that women are so vulnerable, they could not possibly experience a hug from a friendly colleague, that Netflix felt the need to get in and get involved, #MeToo. And this obviously trivializes so deeply the meaning of sexual assault. It downgrades it, it makes it into nothing, when it should obviously be something very serious. It's interesting addressing you today. Kleenex have changed their branding from man-sized tissues to extra-large tissues. Now, perhaps you think that's a good thing to do. Perhaps you think actually we should be trying to take gender out of products. But their reasoning for it is that it's sexist, is that those tissues are sexist. Have we forgotten the definition of sexism? To believe that women are inferior to men? Have we forgotten the definition of sexual harassment and sexual assault and rape? That this is not staring or hugs. I've often heard it said that the men who are nervous and scared of Me Too are the ones who either don't know how to interact with women or have sinister intentions. And I think Minna is completely right, actually, that because of the focus of Me Too, perhaps the ones who should be a bit more scared, the ones who think it's okay to push women up against walls in dark alleys or to not listen to them saying no, aren't afraid enough. Because the #MeToo movement has instilled fear into the people who shouldn't have it. As a poll done by The Economist late last year found in several developed countries, millennial men, upwards of 25% of them, thought that asking a woman out for a drink was sexual harassment. So while we have very much ignored and trivialized the serious issues of sexual assault, we have made men terrified to ask a woman out for a beer. According to another survey commissioned by Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In initiative, the number of male managers who are uncomfortable mentoring women has tripled since the #MeToo movement began. Now, if you do know a bit about the gender pay gap, and you do have an understanding as to why women aren't in some of those more senior roles, we need some of those men at the top, as well as the women who are already there, reaching out and mentoring younger women to stay in the workplace and get more involved. But no wonder they're terrified right now to have a say in that. For me, the utter failure of Me Too came to highlight just very recently over in the United States, when Dr. Ford, who asked to remain anonymous, was denied that by politicians, pushed into a kangaroo court, and made to testify in front of the world, and was subsequently harassed afterwards. This movement knew that she would not get justice through trial by media. It knows that the way that women get justice is through the court system so they can actually be heard and actually see the men who hurt them punished, but they did it to her anyway. And a movement that pushes a woman in that direction, which she said she didn't want in the first place, is one that has failed. And I'll sum up by addressing what I think I have heard from the opposition so far, is that Me Too is a success because we need to believe women and because women's voices need to be heard. And I would argue yes to both of those things. The vast majority of women are telling the truth, and we need to listen to their voices. But a movement that does not enable them to get justice, which #MeToo has not, has failed. You can get answers right on a multiple choice test and still fail the test. Yes, Me Too has had moments, especially in its beginning, in its organic upbringing, when women had a louder voice. But what has transpired has been an utter failure. So I would argue very much tonight that we need to support this motion, and we cannot let the celebrities wearing black couture gowns that cost more than the average yearly salary in the UK continue to highlight a hashtag that's actually turned into more of a frightening message than it has an empowering one. So please support this motion with me tonight that this movement has failed, and let's find a movement that's deserving of the women who so desperately need to be heard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. We move on now to our second speaker for the opposition, Karina Harford. Karina's a third-year English student at Christ College, Cambridge, and one of tonight's student speakers. We're especially thankful to Karina, where she did step in pretty much at the last minute to save our bacon after Nadia Essex has sadly come down ill. So thank you very much, Karina. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. So I was asked to write this speech this morning, and it's been great. It's been a big day. And I was told about 2 minutes before we came in that I was speaking for this team, not this team. So what I'm going to do is read you what I have here, which is this is me localizing the debate to consider the effect of the Me Too movement specifically on the University of Cambridge and how the movement has affected students and the university's treatment of sexual harassment and assault. I think this argument falls somewhere in the middle of both of these parties, but you can make your own mind up, I guess. So, I'm in a unique position to do this for 2 reasons. First, I run a theatre company that focuses on the experiences of women and non-binary people. Second, I am currently working with the Wilberforce Society, researching student perceptions of and experiences with the university's student harassment and sexual misconduct policy. With my theatre company, I'm about to stage a second version of a play called Public House, the first of which happened almost exactly a year ago, at the very beginning of the Weinstein case. Public House uses testimonial accounts of sexual harassment and violence from mainly women and non-binary people and turns these accounts into verbatim immersive theatre. A majority of these accounts explicitly state that they are from Cambridge students. I have therefore been the recipient of a large volume of testimony, roughly 60 accounts, both before and after the proliferation of the Me Too movement, which allows me to directly compare the impact of Me Too on the anonymous submissions I receive. Unfortunately, and perhaps unsurprisingly, I see little difference in the content of the testimony from 2017 to 2018, other than perhaps a sad realization that not much has changed. One example from the 2018 version is from an anonymous article published by Varsity on the 23rd of January of this year. The writer details a violent rape resulting in a blue swelling called a vulvar hematoma, an injury, the writer states, more commonly acquired in childbirth. Her assailant, she details, asked her to confirm that he was not a rapist before demanding that she at least perform oral sex on him. The writer is painfully aware of the cultural zeitgeist surrounding her experience. She states, "I was a Weinstein-era rape. When #MeToo spread to my Facebook newsfeed, I was still lying in bed, not really mobile. As celebrity after celebrity became engulfed in the scandal, I was working my way slowly through a list of milestones to tick off." This is not an anomalous testimony. I estimate that half the accounts I receive detail assault or rape, and not one of these testimonies details the assailant being held accountable by either the police or this university. In the process of amassing these accounts and rehearsing this play, I've met numerous female non-binary students who have tried to use the systems of justice available to them and have been failed by those systems. I have met several female students who are being formally accused of harassing their assailants, having brought their assault cases to the university. 2 had been asked to take time off so their attacker could be in a different academic year to them. One woman was so badly failed by the system that she dropped out, and I'm sure she is not the first undergraduate to leave under such abysmal circumstances. Another account from 2018 states, "The reaction of people in college was honestly one of the most formative experiences in my feminist journey. Before then, I had never experienced such blatant sexism from men and women alike. As a woman in this situation, my account was doubted, I was scapegoated, my character dragged through the mud, I was childishly bullied. These people have never apologized to me for essentially scarlet lettering me." So much for the Me Too movement changing attitudes, if not systems. If this is what's happening at the University of Cambridge, a supposedly progressive environment, I dread to think what happens elsewhere, perhaps, for example, the United States Senate. I empathize fully with the above account. I too have tried to use the university's student harassment and sexual misconduct policy with little success. I was met by a selection of women, all of whom told me in some form that they were sorry, that they believed me, but that they couldn't help me. The people who could help me were men, and they refused to meet me in person because it would be inappropriate. Even the women involved weren't exemplary. My sexuality was questioned, my mental health was queried, my story was dissected, my logical actions were deemed illogical and concluded to be wrong in the situation. I was told to look after myself better next time. I was told the experiences of others affected by the same assailant were not relevant to my case and could not be used as evidence. I was told my complaint wasn't serious enough to merit my physical protection, and in fact I was penalized for making too much of a fuss and told that I might be sued for defamation. My complaint coincided perfectly with Harvey Weinstein's fall from grace, starting on the 5th of October 2017. People kept telling me that the Me Too movement was good for my case, that it made addressing sexual assault and rape topical or on trend. These women faced what I faced, a system stacked against them, and women, in the Hollywood narrative, got together to fight the bad man. But no one came forward with me. None of the other victims I spoke to felt able to come forward. They did not want their names involved in the case, and they did not feel capable of dealing with the stress and re-traumatization of an investigation. The investigator, who was assigned to me, tearfully apologized to me at the end of her investigation after it had been discovered that her methods made my case almost totally unviable. The head of the relevant department could not explain even the most basic policies to me. The women tried to support me, but no one stood with me because it was too difficult or because they couldn't. And in retrospect, I completely support their reticence to become involved. I wouldn't advise anyone feeling unstable to enter into such an ordeal. This brings me to my work with the Wilberforce Society, the Wilberforce Society, a student think tank. I am currently working on a policy paper about the university's required standard of proof in cases of sexual harassment and misconduct. A complainant must currently be able to prove beyond reasonable doubt that their experience of harassment, assault, or rape occurred. I have been tasked with collecting data on student perceptions of and experience with the existing policy. Data is still being collected, but these are some current statistics as of today. When asked if they believed that Cambridge University's policy on student harassment and sexual misconduct functions well in a majority of cases, 38% disagreed or strongly disagreed, and 50% neither agreed nor disagreed. 88% of respondents, therefore, do not feel positively that the system works. When asked if they needed to use the policy and the attached procedures, they would feel comfortable doing so. If they needed to, not when they needed to, I hope they don't. 34% disagreed that they would feel comfortable doing so, and 13% strongly disagreed, meaning that almost half the respondents believed they would be uncomfortable using the existing system. When asked if they believe the current policy's required standard of proof is both fair to complainants and defendants, 23% disagree and 21% strongly disagree, meaning that 44% of respondents do not believe the existing system is fair to both parties. Interestingly, the majority of male respondents state that they trust in and feel comfortable with the system, but not one male respondent confirms that they've actually used that system. One of the survey's respondents had this to say: "There was a requirement of evidence which, while I understand it, was incredibly difficult to find, especially as someone who made a complaint against an ex-partner. There was especially seemed to be a lack of understanding of sexual assault within relationships." This respondent succinctly summarizes one of the main problems with our systems and our wider attitudes towards rape. Coming forward is not only challenging on a personal level, but also on a legal and social level, because our systems place little value on women's testimonial evidence. In cases of rape and assault, there is often very little or no physical evidence of the incident. It is one person's testimony against another's. I've lost where I am. Bear with. And a system that deems the accused innocent until proven guilty, victims of sexual assault have little hope. It is almost impossible to prove someone categorically guilty of rape or assault, most especially in situations where the persons involved already know each other, which is approximately 90% of cases, according to Rape Crisis UK, and cases in which the victim did not report immediately and receive a rape kit, which aren't always effective for a number of reasons. In a society that figures rape as a dark alley and a drunk girl, many people feel their experience doesn't count, or don't know how to categorize it, or how to talk about it.
Surely if you're going to drag someone's whole personality through the mud and label them as a rapist, you need to be beyond reasonable doubt that they have done what you're alleging that they've done.
I'm talking about evidence, not how you feel. You're being asked to present evidence. They feel 100% sure that this person has raped them, but they do not have the physical evidence to back that up because they don't have this person's DNA on their body within 24 hours of the assault having happened. I see your point, but I don't think you've understood my point. Excellent. Right. Good. So, many people feel their experience doesn't count, or don't know how to categorize it, or how to talk about it, or who even to talk to. Rape in our society often reflects badly on the victim. What were you wearing? What were you doing? What were you drinking? Who were you with? And where were you? Before you've even started speaking, the language of response is accusatory, demeaning, and victim-blaming. In the case of Weinstein, I doubt his accusers would have been taken seriously if they hadn't been so numerous, with so many women vouching for each other's experiences. This sadly only reinforces the idea that a woman's testimony is unreliable in and of itself, and the idea that an assailant is more guilty, and more provably so, in cases of repeat offenses, making the individual act of sexual violence seem almost negligible when they are without a wider behavioral pattern. So yes, watching Rose McGowan lead the charge against sexual violence is admirable and inspiring, but hasn't changed the fact that our systems of reporting and investigating sexual violence on an institutional and legal level are archaic, re-traumatizing, and structurally stacked against women and marginalized people. The Me Too movement opened the conversation to a wider audience, but hasn't solved our very real problems. Me Too seemingly did little for Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, Stormy Daniels, the victim of the Ulster rape trial, or any of the women and non-binary people who have submitted testimony to me. High or low profile, there seems to be an important shift in dialogue, but very little institutional or structural change to accompany it. Finally, I would like to add that Cambridge University still does not donate to the Cambridge Rape Crisis Centre, despite recommending it to students who are in need of support of that nature. The centre is currently critically underfunded to the point at which it is no longer running support groups for survivors of sexual violence. You can donate to them on their website. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Karina, and especially considering the notice we gave you on that. I thought it was a really useful contribution to a motion which is much more nuanced than perhaps the binary of the chamber allows for. We're going to move on now to another round of floor speeches. So if anyone wants to speak in proposition of the motion, can you put your hands up? I'm looking up at the gallery. Is there someone up at the gallery? Up there? Okay, we'll go around there. Alex? Alex is making his way around. Perfect. Can you say your name and college first, please, for the record?
Zachary Marsh, Robinson College. It's just a small point, but it did just strike in my mind when the lady on the opposition side was just speaking then. She mentioned that it's very hard to prove rape in a case where there's a presumption of innocence for the person who's being accused. And I may be insinuating too much from that comment, but I was quite concerned by the potential repercussions of that idea, that somehow we need to go back and look at one of our oldest judicial establishments, the idea that you are innocent until proven guilty in order to improve conviction rates. And I think this is potentially endemic of what Kate said, which is that the Me Too movement has actually become something that's quite terrifying and has taken on quite a lot of negative connotations. Because when we're starting to talk about looking at something which is intrinsically central to a fair trial, and these things do need to be conducted in a fair and transparent manner, and we are instead prioritising convictions and results over due process, I think that's quite a troubling idea, and I think that's part of the problem of Me Too, that we're willing to sacrifice institutions which provide due process and ensure that when actions are taken, they're suitable, and are instead just about getting speedy results through this trial by media. And it's for that reason that I say that we should support the proposition in this case, because Me Too has gone too far.
Thank you. You do have a right to reply. Yes, it's gonna
Glorious. Okay, so what you have just said is that it's very hard to prove something in a court of law when someone is innocent until proven guilty. Right. So as Miranda was saying earlier, only 50% of rape cases are being convicted. So it's not that we're over-convicting, it's that we are under-convicting. You're looking at me like I'm insane. Go again. Come on. Yes.
What I was saying is that you were insinuating that in order to bring the conviction rate up, as you've advocated for, and I'm sure we all agree with, you were saying that in order to do that, there may need to be a change in the system so that there isn't quite so much of a presumption of innocence, because at the moment that's a barrier to conviction. And I think that's quite a dangerous argument.
Okay.
I agree with you, and I think you've interpreted my comments to an extreme. And what I would like to say is that obviously everyone is innocent till proven guilty, but it is very difficult to categorically prove someone guilty of rape, especially in the context that we've been discussing, which are rapes within relationships, rapes within family. It's terrifying how many cases of rape are not being properly investigated. So yes, everyone is innocent till proven guilty, but we need to change the way in which we can prove that guilt, is perhaps a better answer to your question.
Thank you. Does anyone have a point in opposition of the motion? I'm going to go to the very back there, Emma.
Emma Plowright, St John's College. I just wanted to pick up on a point you made in your speech, which was saying that some crimes are more trivial than others. And while I'm not at any point saying that all crimes can be viewed the same, I just don't think in the context of the Me Too movement that it can be helpful to kind of separate them like that, because it's so rare for women to speak out that it's considered brave. And specifically in the Matt Damon case, what he did was step forward on a women's issue and belittle the voices of women by breaking up their experiences. And I really feel that the Me Too movement should be about taking any act of violence against women and taking it seriously.
Thank you. Thank you, Emma. Does anyone have a point in abstention of the motion? Any points in abstention? I'm going to go at the back there. Lynn.
Okay, can everyone hear me? So my main point in abstention is I think both the second round speeches weren't necessarily about Me Too, especially the second one. There's some horrible things that are happening, and I agree with the first one in, okay, it's like the American sexual register. You can get into it by peeing in public, or you can get into it for serial rape. Guess what? The two crimes aren't the same. With the Me Too movement, there's horrendous things that happen to people, and the touching the knee, that is not the same. But I'm not thinking that that's necessarily about just Me Too. because a lot of things is happening with political correctness right now. I've seen other hashtags, like the guy's hashtag, how I changed was that one, wasn't it? So there's different factors. And so I don't think it's quite the correct question. And if you want a summary, I think, okay, I've got a younger brother. And I'm female, I've got a younger brother. A girl perspective, a guy perspective. Look at it from both perspectives, people. Don't think about what's me. Think about what's the person I care most about, what's my younger brother. And then compare. Then you can look at it from both ways. And I would recommend doing that. But then for a second speech, utterly respect where you're coming from as well.
I know that there were lots of hands there. I'm going to go for one very quick additional round, but I want these to be 30-second speeches, and I will be asking you to stick to that. Otherwise, I will step in. So does anyone want to quickly speak in proposition of the motion at all? Any more points in proposition? Up there for me. 30 seconds.
Hello, yes. The debate so far has been predicated on the idea, which I think, as one of the speakers mentioned, is fundamentally quite misogynistic, of women as angels, as harmless. Well, what about the victims of women? What about, the name that comes to mind is Lena Dunham. What does this slogan of believe women say to the victims of women? This hasn't been addressed on any side of the debate, but I think is most pertinent here.
Yeah, there's a right. Does anyone want to speak in opposition of the motion? There was somebody down there. I'm gonna go there, if that's all right. Again, 30 seconds.
The proposition has been convincing at this point in pointing out the imperfections and the flaws of the Me Too movement, but the motion is not, can the Me Too movement be improved? It is, has the Me Too movement failed? And let us not forget that we've all gathered in this room to listen to the experiences of remarkable people because of the Me Too movement. This debate wouldn't be happening if it wasn't for the Me Too movement, nor would millions of debates in households, universities, and workplaces all over the world over the past 2 years. Progress has been made. Nowhere near enough progress, and the progress has been far too slow, but this movement has made progress, and therefore it has not failed. I urge you to vote in opposition of the motion.
Thank you. And very quickly, an abstention. I approve of the clapping, but let's keep it brisk. Sorry, I didn't mean to demean your point by urging it that we stop clapping, but I've just ruined the whole point of cutting your applause by talking for too much. Sorry. An abstention, we'll just go quickly here.
Is that, yeah? We might see the Me Too movement as having revealed kind of some key divides in feminism, one of which is a collectivist feminist approach, which is women kind of working together to tackle systematic problems, versus an individualist one which prioritises empowering individual women and kind of discouraging a victim mindset. These are both valid forms of feminism which can be compatible. So what I'd like to hear from both sides is, do we think #MeToo has pitched these two against each other and kind of created a vision of feminism as a divided movement, or has it actually been good for opening up a discourse about the ways we can be feminists and the different ways we can support victims of sexual assault?
Thank you. We move on now to our main debate and our two final speakers for both sides. We move on to Ella Whelan. Ella Whelan is an assistant editor at Spiked. She regularly features as a political commentator on TV and radio, specialising in the relationship between free speech, feminism, and women's liberation. She is the author of What Women Want: Fun, Freedom, and an End to Feminism. Ella, the floor is yours.
On that bombshell, thank you. Hello, everyone. Has Me Too failed? I want to argue that it has, but I want you to push you a little bit further. and say that actually I think that Me Too was doomed to fail, was wrong from the start, had very little redeeming qualities initially anyway, and also that Me Too is not the groundbreaking, earth-shattering, curtain-dropping moment that we think it is, but that it is a replica of quasi-online movements, of contemporary feminist outbursts that have happened before. I was having this exact same debate a few years ago when #EverydaySexism came out. And Laura Bates, who was the author of that particular movement, said that that was the groundbreaking moment against sexual harassment, and that was the hashtag that was going to get women talking, and that was the moment when everything would change. I don't particularly understand why Me Too has gained such ground, potentially because it's had the backing of certain celebrities, and I find it intrinsically insulting that some might argue that women were silent before an absurdly paid actress decided to put out a tweet. That before that moment at which the hashtag #MeToo was first written on Twitter, women, feminists, women's liberationists were silenced before then, were disempowered before then. I think that is, that riles me, and it riles women feminists who I know of an older generation. Because I think that at the heart of Me Too is not an empowering war cry against injustice, is not an argument against sexual harassment, it's not even a vision for a world in which women won't have to think about these things. But at its center, it is a victim narrative in a way that does not empower women, but fundamentally disempowers them. The central fact that it is an online movement, this kind of very bizarre, I'm a fan of social media, right? I'm a journalist, I have to be. But this very bizarre idea that things that happen online, immediately change real world, real life experiences. The fact that Me Too encourages women not to act in that instance when something bad happens, whatever shape it takes, but to wait, to not speak up, but then to report later online. So when that guy on the street shouts, "Oi, sexy legs," or whatever it is, that you don't give him the finger, that you don't say, "Excuse me, that's not the right way to talk to someone that you don't know," but that you wait, you let him off the hook, and then later you tweet about it, and you might get 10, 100, 1,000 retweets. That, to me, doesn't necessarily seem like justice. That doesn't even, to me, seem like politics. That seems to me like, yep. Which? Online and... Good point. Not necessarily, but the problem with Me Too is that it is exclusively online. I mean, the fact is, you don't see women meeting up in council halls or out on the street, bar the odd anti-Trump outburst or something like that. You don't have feminist movements organizing in communities. You don't have the solid, on-the-ground, organic, grassroots movements of Me Too. It hasn't materialized. It is fundamentally an online movement. I think that it's hard to make the kind of argument that I'm making, right? Because you often get labeled as I have been, a rape apologist, someone who's got no heart, someone who doesn't know what it's like to be sexually harassed, someone who thinks that women should just put up and shut up. Actually, I think that if you kind of go with me in my criticism of Me Too, you'll see that what I'm saying is actually a far more fundamental women's liberation-based argument for women's sexual freedom. Because I think the biggest victim of Me Too is women's ability to be sexually expressive. So the fact is, post-Me Too, we are encouraged as women to see... Hang on, I'll take a second one. I'm in a flow. Post-Me Too, we're encouraged to see all sexual interactions as somehow potentially suspect. Sex is a danger to be navigated, to be managed, rather than one of the fundamentally most enjoyable, in my opinion anyway, aspects of adult life. It's yes, it's risk, yes, it's unknown, but it's potentially, most of the time, fairly wonderful. I think the problem with Me Too is that from the very very low-level, basic interactions between men and women, and it really is mainly this discussion about men and women, though I know that it happens elsewhere, that first wink, that first look, that first non-consensual movement is seen as negative, is seen as, unwarranted, as dangerous, rather than potentially the start of the best shag you ever had. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Let me give you an anecdote, because I feel safe talking about anecdotes tonight because Me Too is based on anecdote. It's about, it's not necessarily about empirical evidence, but it's based on women telling stories. A friend that I knew at Sussex put up a post on Facebook after Me Too. She'd opened the door to the postman. She'd just got a pedicure. And he said, what beautiful feet you have. I think your feet are beautiful. And she was outraged at this, and she went on and on about how non-consensual it was, how she hadn't invited this, and this was a symbol of the patriarchy oppressing women, and hashtag Me Too. And you just have to think, for fuck's sake. I mean, seriously, but I'm not trying to make light of this, but that is the level at which the majority of discussion about Me Too is. I would welcome a discussion about the stats in relation to rape. I would welcome a discussion about being more serious about sexual assault and sexual harassment. The fundamental point of Me Too is that it is not serious, as my previous speakers have said. It is about this low-level flirtation, the low-level sexual interaction between men and women, which can go bad, but a lot of the time goes well. I think about injustice, if Me Too, as it claims, is fundamentally about fighting injustice, well, then it has failed. Because what it's done is not only, and we can have a whole other debate about what it's done to guys, and I'm sort of selfishly less interested in that. I think false accusations, I think the tarnishing of reputations is an important point that needs to be talked about. But for women and women's justice, what it has done in the calls to believe victims, to put aside the necessity for innocent until proven guilty or for evidence, it has positioned women as agency-less. We are just children to be believed. We are just figures at which actions are done to. We are not agents. We are not, centers of our own responsibility. We have no accountability. We are just victims. That's it. That's all we will ever be post-Me Too. So if it's about getting justice for women, it's failed. And if it's about creating a world in which sex is more free and more enjoyable and less regulated, well then absolutely it's failed. I have time and again young women at university who haven't even got to campus yet, right? Don't even know what they're getting into, expressing fears about the fact that they might be raped at university, expressing fears about going out and fraternizing with the other sex and what it might happen. You go into bars in certain parts of the UK and they have posters on the toilets which say, if you're something to paraphrase, if your date's not really going well, if you're not having a good time, if you're feeling a bit uncomfortable, ask for an angel shot at the bar, meaning the bar staff will intervene on your behalf in that awkward date. We are telling women that sex is terrifying, that men are terrifying, and that men their age are only out to get them. And I can't see any evidence of that being the case. I think if we want to get serious about penalizing those people out there who will do bad things and want to do bad things, the very wrong way about that is to tell the women who are having bad things done to them that they need to enter life and experience life through a prism of fear. No. One of the anecdotes that came out, I knew I was going to get loads of points of information, it's because I'm making the extreme case, but go with me. One of the interesting tenets of Me Too was the generational divide. And I think it's really important to go here because you had a sort of intensely youthful feel to the online movement by the nature of social media. You had a kind of lots of young women coming out and giving their experiences. And then quite quickly you had some older feminists voicing disquiet about the Me Too movement. You had Catherine Deneuve, you had Anne Leslie, who told an anecdote about her putting out a cigarette on someone's hand who was trying to grope her, and she was utterly lambasted for telling that anecdote because she wasn't being self-deprecating enough and wasn't, making good of the fact that she was actually a victim in that scenario. And Margaret Atwood, who wrote an article very lightly and very reasonably criticizing Me Too, being called a traitor to the sex. What's happened is that a generation of women who know what sexual harassment is like, right, who had it on a daily basis, my mother's generation, some of the things that my mum told me that happened makes my jaw drop, who knew that a society in which sexism was very real and often rife, being denied their voices in this movement and being told to shut up and make space for young women who seem to have all the knowledge in relation to this. And what those older women have to say is that, yes, we had bad things happen to us, and yes, life was hard, but do you know why it changed? And do you know why women of my age, in their 20s today, have a relatively better life in relation to sexual freedom? Do you know why it isn't the case that every single man on the street is staring at your boobs or trying to get near you on the bus? It's because we spoke up. And I think this is the key thing about Me Too for me, is that it is not necessarily about women speaking up when it matters. It's a difficult point to make, but if you want to make a political change for women's liberation, which is to make women free, sexually free in this case, free to go about their daily business without harassment, you have to do something on the ground. You have to do something that matters, rather than engaging in virtue signaling, victim narrative-based online bullshit. No. It's too good a point. Because if we continue to give credence to this, I think, very long-standing and negative feminist movement, we heard about Catherine McKinnon and the anti-porn feminists and the decades-long argument that words and looks and feelings and insinuations are as dangerous for women as actions. That is the central, Me Too is the greatest expression of everything that has been wrong with feminism for a very long time. To scrap all of that and get back to a very real sense of what women's liberation is about, which is about fun and freedom and sexual expression and a life that is completely free from fear. Me Too asks women to be afraid. I refuse to be afraid, and I invite you to refuse to be afraid and reject this motion.
Thank you, Ella. We move on now to the final speaker in tonight's debate, Piper Whitehead. Piper is a first-year art historian at Pembroke College, Cambridge, and she's the second of our two student speakers. Remember, there is an initiative to try and get you all involved by having audition places for student speakers. So if you're interested in next week's debate, which I'll mention after this, do just look on the Facebook page and your emails, and that will show you how to get involved with that. Anyhow, Piper, the floor is yours.
I think my preceding speaker was correct when she said that her speech was the most extreme case that we had heard so far down their bench. So I'm going to talk a bit about what she said, then I'm going to talk to you about what we've heard from the other speakers in this debate. Firstly, around the focus of the Me Too movement, whether or not that is in itself incorrect. Secondly, about its execution in terms of its consequences for victims and for men. So let's have a look at what she told us. I think it's pretty apparent from the first two speakers that have already spoken on my side bench that sexual assault in terms of rape and violence is extremely prevalent in our society still, and that's something we need to worry about. But let's talk about those low-level offences that I think's been focused on a lot by the proposition. bench? Why does it matter if a man brushes past you, puts his hand on your thigh or your butt? Why does it matter if he stares at you too long? Because that man might be staring at you because he's not really paying attention to anything, but he might be staring at you because he intends to assault you. The issue is that all of these small actions matter because they are precursors to actual actions that may occur and may harm you, and it is right for women to point out that behavior because that behavior is incredibly easy to fix. Just last night, I was walking home in the dark. A man was walking behind me. He'd made the effort of stopping me, saying, "I'm going to walk in front of you so that you know that I'm not following you home." It's incredibly easy for men not to act like dicks. We think that just don't do these things. So yes, women are calling out small behaviors, but those small behaviors are also easy fixes. So let's talk about them as well. Okay, so let's have a look at what we've heard so far. Firstly, in terms of focus from the Me Too movement. What we heard earlier in the debate was that it has become a media commodity. It's become celebrities essentially harnessing what is their privilege and their version of the narrative to take a different kind of debate. And that was a problem because it took it away from academic feminism. So let's talk about that. I think that academic feminism is something that is very relevant to the Me Too debate, but it's not the only part of the Me Too debate that matters. Most women who posted with a Me Too hashtag don't connect with the extensive feminist theory that has happened in years before. They don't relate to this high educational background. It's not something they have personally experienced. What they have experienced is being groped on public transport. So we think that if the Me Too movement was going to mean something to the vast majority of women who don't actually know a lot about complex feminist theory but are just trying to live their lives, the Me Too movement can be separate from academic theory and can perform a different function. That does not say that that theory is unimportant or that it shouldn't be promoted as well, that they are not mutually exclusive things. They target very different experiences for very different classes of women. We think that if you are someone who is from a working class background who doesn't get access to university education, the Me Too movement is something that's a more accessible brand of feminism for you. That importance cannot be understated. The next thing that we heard from them was that it's focused on the wrong issues. Essentially, it goes just towards celebrities and Hollywood. I think that's untrue for a few reasons. Firstly, yes, it does have celebrities that back it. We think that most social movements, in order to get off the ground, do require those kind of voices in order to back them. And that is the way that gets Me Too movement to be something that is popular. But that does not actually negate what these celebrities have done for people. We think that the Time's Up movement is a key example of that. They have raised millions of dollars for legal aid. And that legal aid goes towards people in the lower strata of the entertainment profession. We don't hear about their cases in the news every day because they're not celebrities, but that doesn't mean that that didn't happen. That kind of money raising and that kind of funding does not occur in a world in which Me Too hasn't happened and hasn't become the hashtag phenomenon that I think we can all agree that it has. The last point around focus that we heard is that, and this was, I think, from a floor speaker, is that it doesn't cover sexual assault by women. In a broad sense, that may be true, but it doesn't have to. It doesn't cover climate change either. That doesn't mean climate change isn't a problem. It would be good if it did cover also men's problems of men who have been assaulted by women. It would be nice if that happened, but that doesn't mean that the movement and what it intends to do has failed, because it does intend to talk about women's experiences, which I think have been very thoroughly backed up by my previous speakers, are extraordinarily prevalent and not talked about to the extent that they should be. I think women are the most commonly victimized in the society by sexual assault for a whole host of reasons. Men's issues are important, but they do not have to be the focus of the Me Too movement in order for it to be considered a success. So let's have a look next to the execution, which I think has become the more sort of hotbed issue as this debate has gone on. So we've heard a lot of concerns about justice, about men being told off for doing things that are relatively minor and then, having a terrible life after that. So let's have a look at what this actually looks like. First thing I'd like to note is that the fear that you may have as a man of being accused of sexual assault is probably nothing compared to the fear that all women have about being sexually assaulted. We think that when you walk home carrying keys... There are things that women think about every single day that don't even come into the male conception of their lives, right? Things about carrying keys in between your hands when you're walking home, not renting an apartment on the first floor, not leaving your windows open if you're at home alone. All of those kind of things men don't even think about. Women are afraid every day, and they are rightfully afraid because bad things can happen to them in the society that we live in. So I'd like to preface this part of the speech with that reminder. The second thing I'd like to say is that men might be told off for small things, right? But the guy who said that, like, your friend has beautiful feet didn't go to jail, did he, right? Like, someone just complained about what he had done. The consequences for men, and I think the speaker who spoke just before me demonstrated this extremely effectively, are still incredibly marginal. Men might be told off or have a tweet made about them for something that they see as minor, like sitting too close to a woman or staring creepily. They are not going to jail for those things. That is something that needs to be remembered when we say the Me Too movement is criminalizing people for actions that we might consider minor. And let's face it, it's very easy to avoid getting in problem with those issues. Just ask if something is okay. It's not hard. You can do it very easily. And we think that means you're probably going to have, like, a better shag if people are asking you about what you like. So let's have a look then at what else we heard from the rest of the speakers. So we heard that essentially the execution portrays women as victims. But women are victims. Like, the word victim, I understand, is loaded with a lot of, like, terms around sort of like whether or not you're complicit in that, but women do face these problems. We do need to acknowledge that these problems exist and that women do, in fact, face them and that they do experience them. And I think it's not mutually exclusive to the kind of things that were talked about by the speaker who just came before me. We think that women in the Me Too movement actually are more inspired to do things like the finger to someone who catcalls them, or to actually talk about an assault that occurs in a world where that discussion is acceptable. Because what the Me Too movement has done, it may be something that has happened before in society, we may have also had these moments that have occurred previously, but it has made, I think, to a size that has not been comparable in previous society, the discussion of sexual assault to actually be acceptable. And that is not a victim narrative. That is a narrative of saying, this thing happened to me, I'm not going to shut up about it, I'm not going to, like, shut up and put up, I'm going to say that it happened. And that's not mutually exclusive at all to doing things at the time. I think the most likely scenario, actually, for these women that might have, like, yelled back at a catcaller was that they wouldn't have yelled back or tweeted before the Me Too movement. At least we get someone who maybe tweets, and maybe because they have read other experiences of sexual assault, because they know this is an issue that they no longer have to be silent about, they might also go forward and be bold in the way that they never were before. The Me Too movement, if anything, emboldens women to act in the moment because they know that their experiences aren't acceptable. Yes?
Just what did women do before the internet?
They did exactly what they can still do
feminists,
with the internet.
How did feminists fight this, how did women fight this kind of sexual harassment, which was much more prevalent 20, 30 years ago, before the internet?
I understand that they did that. They can still do that. And they can also use the internet. These are two things that can exist. Different women feel comfortable with different levels of action. This opens up to a broader spectrum of people who maybe don't feel comfortable burning someone with a cigarette. They would rather tweet. These women weren't accessible before. We can have all of the things that you want, and we can have this nice thing, which is the Me Too movement as well. So So, at the end of this debate, I think the most important thing is to remember is that the Me Too movement is something that started very recently. It's been a year. The patriarchy has existed for thousands of years. So the Me Too movement was never going to solve any of these problems overnight. It was also probably not going to make obsolete the methods that existed prior to the Me Too movement. But what it has done is change the conception that we have around discussing sexual assault in a way that most women who felt alienated from high-level academic discussions or who didn't feel brave enough to go and use the apparently extremely useless sexual assault services that we have in Cambridge, were able to do something that they could never do before because the Me Too hashtag was a community that never existed before, an online community where you could talk to women who felt the same way that you did. That is something that its importance cannot be understated. The Me Too movement has not failed when it gives even one woman a voice to say what happened to her. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Piper. And thank you to all of our speakers tonight for a really engaging conversation. Thank you also, the person who really did all the work for tonight is on my right here, so Julia, who invited all of us and dealt with all the logistics. So can you give Julia a round of applause? Incredible job. Who's our women's officer. And also, just a couple of thanks to the stewards and the HOAMs who did like an incredible job. Sorry, it sounds like an Oscar speech, but who did an incredible job changing the chamber around today. So, and also to all the people who spoke from the floor. You are, of course, as I promised, able to come through to the post-dinner drinks reception. So some of the stewards will show you around there. We'll also, if the publicity team should share a link to the Rape Crisis Centre, which on the event, if anyone wants to donate to that, I think that'd be a good thing to do. In terms of the week ahead, we've got a couple of events going on which I'm going to draw your attention to. So on Saturday, we have the ACS conference working with the Afro-Caribbean Society. There are still quite a few tickets available for that. Speakers look incredible. Stormzy's speaking, as is Oswald Boateng, a fashion designer, the vice president of Malawi, and the leader of the Zimbabwean opposition. So if you're interested in that, if you want to see Stormzy et al., go and have a look on our Facebook page. On Monday, we've got Paul Merton coming to speak. He's going to be at 7 o'clock. That's just been edited, so keep that in your head. He's coming at 7 rather than, I think, 5 or 6, which has been printed on our wall planner. We also have Josh Littlejohn on the Wednesday. And then we have the Churchill Debate this time next week, which should be really interesting as well. This house believes Churchill was no hero. And we've got auditions for that coming up, I think, on Monday. You will be advised on the Facebook page. Good, that's all my notices. So we'll deal with procedure. At the Union, we vote on our feet. So some of you know this by now. We have 3 doors, sorry, only 2 upstairs, so mea culpa. We've got our 3 doors. We have a central door, which is for abstentions. We have the door on my right, which is for the ayes, and we have a door on my left, which is for the noes. The motion before the House is, this House believes #MeToo has failed. Have a great week.